Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Stimson, in person or online. We're glad that you joined us this morning. I'm Andrew Oros. I'm director of the Japan program and a senior fellow here at Stimson. And I'm also a professor of political science and international studies at Washington College. So I want to give a shout out to my students and colleagues there, some of whom are watching online. I'm excited to introduce this event today, which delivers on several of the goals of the Japan program here at Stimson. Number one, to share Japanese voices and perspectives on important issues to a Washington and to an international audience, to cultivate stronger ties between the United States and Japan, and to foster a next generation of thinkers and leaders. And internal to Stimson, to collaborate with others of our related programs on international security, especially around the Indo-Pacific, such as our dynamic Reimagining U.S. Grand Strategy program, represented by Senior Stimson Fellow this morning, Dr. Kelly Grieco. So thank you, Kelly. This event marks the culmination of the work of a binational 12-member task force that was convened by Stimson to examine opportunities and challenges for advanced cooperation between the U.S. and Japan in military shipbuilding and repair. Three of our task force members have joined us today to share some of the findings from our work, and I'll introduce them momentarily. You may also read the views of another of our task force member, retired Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force Vice Admiral Hiroshi Ito, and I co-wrote a commentary that was posted to the Stimson website last Friday after President Trump and Prime Minister Takaichi's meeting at the White House last week. We also intend to post an additional commentary by my co-chair of this task force, Steve Brock, later this week that will further communicate some of our principal proposals for enhancing cooperation in this area. Our panel format today is to ask Dr. Grieco to moderate our discussion and Q&A from the audience, both in person and online, and as well as to share her expert perspective on this issue of shipbuilding, which she's also written about. So I'll turn over the proceedings to her momentarily, but first let me just briefly introduce our three task force panelists here today and online in the order of their opening remarks. And I'll just ask you to refer to their online bios for more extended information about each of our speakers. But after Dr. Grieco's introduction, we'll hear from first Mr. Brent Sadler, who's a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation and 26-year U.S. naval officer. Next, Mr. Yuki Sekiguchi, who is currently vice president of Cognitive Research Labs in Tokyo and a former Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force Rear Admiral. And some of you who are Washingtonians may recognize him as the former defense attaché at the Japanese embassy here in Washington. And finally, on our screen, you can see Dr. Monica Deuce, who is associate professor at the University of Michigan and former special assistant to the 78th Secretary of the U.S. Navy, leading science, education, and force resiliency initiatives. So with that, let me turn the floor over to Dr. Grieco, and I will join you all in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for the lovely introductions and for organizing this event. Welcome, everyone, to Stimson. If you're watching at home, please also be sure to send in your questions because we will have time to take some from the audience as well. So let's get started. I think just to frame the discussion for today, one of the things I find notable about this administration is that it came into office with this America First agenda, particularly around trade issues. But it's very notable in a way that the one place where, in particular, that the administration has really been, it seems, open to cooperation on industrial cooperation is in the shipbuilding field. And I remember the president, even in one of his, sort of taking questions from the press, discussing shipbuilding in the Oval Office, even suggested it may be necessary for us to even buy some ships from allies. But this raises, I think, really interesting questions about what might that cooperation with allies look like around shipbuilding. So I'm really looking forward to remarks from all of you that can actually try to tell us a little bit more about what those next steps might look like. So Brent, I will let you kick it off first with your thoughts on this.
No, absolutely. Thank you again for the opportunity to share these thoughts. My entrance into this national endeavor starts about 5 years ago when I had retired from the Navy in the summer of 2020. And Steve Brock is an early collaborator on this, and the project was called Revolution in Shipping. And an industry that needs a lot of help. And we don't have the intellectual capital. I'm also a frequent visitor to University of Michigan for this reason, like for naval architects. So we didn't have the human capital, we didn't have the industrial capacity, we didn't have the workforce, and we also didn't have the orders to grow this. So you needed to get capital. And American capital wasn't going to follow this industrial sector because it has languished and the return on investment is just too narrow. So who would you go to? Certainly not China. That's a foe, and is very interested in trying to continue to keep the United States a non-player in this sector because it does crossover into security. So who do you go to? You go to your most trusted partners. And so early on in 2021, 2022, the discussion, quite frankly, was very broad. It wasn't a partisan, it wasn't a liberal, it wasn't a conservative. Though I'm at a conservative think tank, it was a national security issue. And for that reason, it made a lot of sense. Engage deeply with your security treaty allies. NATO countries are a mixed bag in this. We can go there if we want to. But our strongest partners in this endeavor are Japan, South Korea, and several other countries. When you start to broaden it out beyond shipbuilding, like the Philippines, with the mariners that they have, one of the largest in the world on mariners. So there was a lot of gravitation and then rational thought that said, okay, how do we do more with our treaty allies? And so setting up incentives, building out structures that would make it conducive for those treaty allies to try to invest that capital to attract it. And at the same time, in Seoul and Tokyo, you had a similar strategic calculation going on. One, hungry for more market share. Great, that's good business. But also the reality that the world's a much more dangerous place. And this 2027 Davidson window is something that's based on a lot of due diligence. We can argue about if it's still 2027. So there is a pressure, and it's driven by China. So how does this look at this point? Well, the capital flows are kind of treading water. They're not flooding in. And it's not just South Korean and Japanese capital, by the way. It's Canadian. If you look at the ICE Pact, it's also Finnish, it's the Italians, it's the Danes, which is an interesting one. It's also the French, if you look at the reflagging. And hopefully tonight we'll find out more about the Greeks. So it's more than just the shipbuilding, it's also the repair, because the shipyard that does the building can do a lot of other things. So moving next from beyond attracting the capital, which is still an issue, is how to actually get tangible labor improvement. So some of the things that are happening, and I don't want to take too much, and the University of Michigan is a central point for a lot of this, is getting our shipyard workers, our foremen, to go and see how the processes are in our partners' countries' shipyards that are most productive, most efficient with modern technologies being fully used. That's not to say that we don't have those technologies. We're just not fully using it in the way that we could and at the scale. So sending like a Mansfield Scholarship with shipyard workers, foremen, going into shipyards. And then on the other side is my old alma mater, the Naval Academy, bringing back programs of naval architecture, getting more money into that so that we can start to address that human capital. So that's where we are right now. That's happening not as fast as I would like, but I'm an incurable optimist. I think we'll get there. And the budget, hopefully, that drops next week will give some of the demand signals, some more budget resources to that. What comes after that is breaking ground on new shipyards, modernization of brownfield. The canary in the shipyard, to kind of take a little twist on a phrase, is Hanwha's endeavors in Philadelphia shipyard. Whether it succeeds or fails it'll either have a chilling effect on other partners in Tokyo, which I'm very eager to try to entice more active investment in the United States, because the window of time is now. But they've made capital investments. But until I see dry docks, graving docks, ship lifts, I mean, this is the heavy kind of, deep investment, strategic investments. It's not enough. But that's where we have to go next in the midterm, not the midterm elections, midterm in the time frame that you laid out. So I'll stop there. I could go on for far too long.
Great, thank you. It's a wonderful start. Admiral, I'll move to you.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yuki Sekiguchi from Tokyo. I used to be a Navy officer for like 38 years, and including my career, I was so happy that I served for the U.S. Naval Academy as an instructor. So I know a little bit about the U.S. Navy system, not only the Japanese Navy system. So today, based on my experience serving in the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, I'd like to make 3 points about revitalizing Japan's shipbuilding industry from the perspective of U.S.-Japan alliance. The first, the biggest problem is not simply a shortage of capacity or technology. It is the industrial structure that does not allow the Japanese shipyard to earn enough profit. As long as Japan continues to compete in the same price-based arena as state-sponsored shipyard in China and Korea, Japanese shipyard will not generate the margin that is needed to modernize facilities, raise wages, attract young workers, or sustain the supplier basis. The negative cycle, that is low margin, stagnant wages, labor shortage, lost skills, and a decline competitiveness is the core problem that Japan has. So the goal is not just to increase the order volume. The goal is to replace unprofitable volume with a profitable and predictable demand. In other words, Japan does not need to create the old scale of commercial shipbuilding. It needs a smaller, stronger, and more profitable industry that can invest in itself. The second, expanding shipbuilding maintenance and repair for the JMSDF and U.S. Navy ship is an essential first step, but it is not enough by itself because defense demand is limited in volume. It cannot on its own revitalize the entire industry. At the same time, it is extremely important because it offers higher value, longer contract horizon, and stronger technological spillovers. In game changers, it is game changers. For the United States, it would, in particular, expanding forward maintenance repair for the U.S. Navy ship in Japan, that could be a great big game changer. For the United States, it would reduce the maintenance delay and improve readiness in the Indo-Pacific region. For Japan, it would provide stable dollar-denominated revenue, a higher shipyard utilization, and a stronger foundation for workforce retention and skill transfer. So the right question is not whether defense demand can replace all lost commercial value. The right question is whether it can restore the industry to a condition where the investment, modernization, and skill preservation become possible again. My answer is yes. If the defense demand is used as an anchor, not the entire strategy. The third piece is what we need is the comprehensive strategy that uses defense as an anchor while transforming industry as a whole. I would highlight 5 actions. The first, shipbuilding must be redefined from a market-driven industry into the national security infrastructure. Japanese government should use long-term contracting, tax incentives, financing support, and shipyard modernization fund to create stable investment environment. The second, selected Japanese shipyard should be developed into a joint forward maintenance hub for JMSDF ship and the U.S. Navy ship. That will require alignment on the certification, parts supply, information security, cyber standards, and contracting procedures. The third, Japan needs a second pillar of high value demand beyond the defense. It should stimulate the construction of a specialized vessel that support offshore wind, subsea cable installation, heavy lift operation, and other maritime infrastructure tied to energy security and supply chain resilience. The fourth, the Japan must reform its supply chain and build smart shipyard. Too much money is lost in fragmented multi-layer subcontracting. Smaller and medium-sized firms must be able to earn, invest, and survive. At the same time, Japan should move decisively to the AI-based design, digital twin, robotic welding, and automated production systems. Japan will not beat China on scale. It can compete on precision, reliability, and advanced manufacturing. The fifth, workforce development must become a national project. Japan should build a maritime skill pipeline linking shipyard, universities, and technical institute, and where it's possible, U.S.-Japan training exchanges. This is not a proposal to protect the old system. This is a proposal to align policy with the strategic value. My conclusion is clear. Japan's ship industry will not recover by competing to the mass-produced low-cost ship. It can recover only by being redefined as a strategic maritime capability that supports the alliance. Defense demand should be the anchor, but at the same time, energy, maritime infrastructure, high-value commercial vessel should be the main pillar of Japanese shipbuilding. Smart modernization, supply chain reform, and workforce development should provide the foundation. This is the most realistic way to rebuild Japan's shipbuilding base and at the same time strengthen the long-term resilience of U.S.-Japan alliance. You cannot sustain the naval power on a low-margin industrial model. That is why shipbuilding must now be redesigned as a strategic foundation of national and allied security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Monica?
Good morning, everyone. I am going to talk a little bit more about the importance of science, technology, and education in advancing maritime technology and shipbuilding. So I think at this point, everybody agrees that science and technology leadership are inseparable from national security. But on top of being amazing elements of national power, we also know that there are proven elements of building alliances. And so this is usually known in the field as science diplomacy. And it's not just an amazing way to build alliances on proven by history. Japan and the United States have one of the oldest scientific collaborations, all the way from engineering to biotechnology. As of now, is 45 years old. One of the pillars has been actually the development of technology for fusion energy. But the scientific collaboration and education and training is truly durable, because on top of being supported by the individual governments and industry, there's also on-the-ground continuous effort and legacy building. Professors usually have long careers. We stay in our jobs until well into our 60s and 70s, and we build our legacy by training students and trainees across generation. And usually those students cross the oceans, cross the Pacific. And so many times the foundation of the scientific and workforce collaboration really go on for decades, beyond government, beyond alliances. And I think we have an amazing opportunity today to really leverage so much of what's been already built in terms of US-Japan collaboration in science and technology and workforce, and really extending to the maritime domain. Just this fall and just last week, the United States and Japan signed a technology prosperity deal covering AI, quantum networks, semiconductors, and space. The RICAN also has a collaboration that was recently struck with the Argonne National Laboratory through the Department of Energy for computing. Many universities in the United States, in collaboration with industry, already have enduring collaboration and partnership with some of the best science and technology institution in the world, which is our national and federal lab network. So, so we think that one of the easier elements of advancing maritime technology and shipbuilding is truly through science, technology, and education, like Brent mentioned. Building programs across the United States and Japan for different elements of the skilled workforce, like foremen, all the way from naval architecture and education, as well as essentially building together an applied research agenda that is focused on AI for ship design, shipbuilding, robotics, automation, life cycle analysis, digital twins, and modeling. And those things, in my experience, the science and the technology are always the easiest problems to solve. And so as we work through some of the harder problem, like the human, like capital, the industrial capacity, I think this is a really great low-hanging fruit that has already existed in terms of amazing cooperation between the country to really extend it to the maritime domain.
Great. Thank you so much. Really interesting remarks from all three of you, and I think giving us three sort of varied perspectives around this problem set in particular. I think just to start, I'll just share a couple of thoughts I have, and then we'll go into some questions before we turn it to the audience. You know, one of the things that occurs to me is hearing these presentations is that there seems to be broad recognition at this point around shipbuilding as being a challenge, and a bit of momentum, it seems, on both sides around cooperation. And yet it seems so slow. And even my own experience in writing a paper on allied shipbuilding, it was remarkable to me just how entrenched interests are around this topic, particularly in US domestic politics. And so it leads me to really wonder, you know, at this point, what's the main barrier here to really going at speed? You know, is this really ultimately a politics issue? Is this a money issue? Is it a labor issue? Is it bottlenecks? It's just something I'm wondering about. And on that, also, when I think about cooperation between allies, I always think about what are the comparative advantages of the two sides. So I'm just sort of thinking about what is it, you know, that is Japan's advantage in this relationship and the United States that we each bring to it that makes this, you know, better than going it alone. I think we'd be interested to hear what you guys think about that. And the final point is, I can't help as someone who's a military strategist to think about, well, what exactly the kinds of ships we should be building and how much that matters here, you know. And of course, you know, everyone in here has Iran on their brain at the moment, even in this event, I'm sorry to say. And so I can't help but, you know, thinking about mines, for example. And Japan is, you know, has one of the greatest, you know, assets of minesweepers in the world. Is that an area where we should focus cooperation on minesweeping, or is that just duplicating U.S. capabilities? Or it's noticeable that, you know, most of the fleet in the Gulf right now is pushed back away, further away. You know, is it more that we should be focusing on cooperation around smaller ships, things like that? So maybe I'll leave it there and let you, the three of you, kind of respond to those comments, and then I'll ask each of you some specific things that your presentation relays. Yeah.
So on the commercial side, there was part of the Ships for America Act effort, which is about a 2-year effort, and it was really remarkable. It's still ongoing. It's a very robust group of about a dozen folks across the political spectrum from industry. And one of the things that was done was to assess what's the type of shipping that's needed. That report, however, remains embargoed. So being undaunted by that, we did another in parallel with many experts adjacent to that, but even deeper into the industry, Government has certain limitations, but we went deep. And the need is about 1,300 ships to mitigate the Chinese economic influence or coercive ability on the U.S. economy, say in a wartime. That's not something you're going to snap your fingers and get. When you break that down, there's container ships, there's tankers, there's heavy lift ships, about 6 of them for shipbuilding to support, because some of the components come from Europe, like Poland, large reciprocal engine type stuff. So to include cable layers and cable repair, undersea cable repair. But one to focus in on is where to place the bets where you're sure to win: tankers. With military adaptations, it's a minor modification that's then called console, and that allows a tanker, a product tanker, to actually transfer fuel to military vessels. We need at least 20 in the Pacific, above what we have now. So if you're going to place an order and you go ahead and start building it, the federal government's probably going to find a use for it or need it. I'm an optimist. I think there's going to be some demand coming in the budget. This is one of the bets. The other is LNG carriers, which is also in that mix. But the report, this number has been out there and broken down with some of the rationale if you look in the footnotes, but more recently in a paper came out in January, and that's thanks to a lot of deep experts. On the military side, focusing just where I think our allies would be best served and the U.S. Navy best served. I have been consistent in advising against trying to build destroyers, nuclear submarines, for the U.S. Navy from those allies as an entrant. That's like at the top of the highest complexity, most sensitive. And I've been very involved from the beginning on AUKUS. So that's a headache, and that's very close allies, and we're finally turning the corner on that, at least on the collaboration. So I've been focused more on the logistics support ships, and I think that's a great place. In addition to, as Admiral Sakaguchi mentioned, the military repair operations in the host countries. This is the building up the familiarity with our ships, with our systems, and then investing in the United States in building, say, like tankers, oilers, perhaps a submarine tender or a destroyer tender. These are ships that have some sensitive capabilities inside, but the design itself is largely somewhere in between commercial standard and naval standard. And I'll never be one that would advocate for reducing that military naval standard. It comes at a premium. It's written in blood. And I'll probably stop there. No.
Great, thank you.
No.
Really interesting. Admiral?
Yes, I'm looking at more like the broader scale. I'm looking at like in the industrial structure, industry itself. Because 3 decades ago, Japan is the top in the ship industries, and we have a lot order from all over the world. But like the Japanese, like electric, appliances like TVs and everything, national like Sony's, it is top like 20 years ago. But now China and Korea, that all comes from like a price competition. And of course, at the time, like 3 decades ago, only the technology is in Japan. So the China, Korea cannot produce any. But of course, the time goes on, the technology proliferate. Everybody can make some certain level of the technologies. That has happened in shipbuilding now. Mm-hmm. So problem we have, like a U.S. and Japan, like a technology like advanced countries, because once we're gonna not making the money, we're gonna put that industry to the cheaper like industry states. So we lost our production power, mm-hmm. and at the same time, I believe that we lost how to revitalize our industry itself, which means China and Korea, that the government fully support that industries. But in Japan, I don't think that's happening. So if the same level, not really the same level, but the similar level of government support for the industry, I don't think it's this level fall down for the Japanese ship industries. So the problem we have here is how we can remodel shipbuilding industry in an advanced country as a profitable business model. That is a big key, because military shipbuilding is a great example for the corporation, but the scale of the business, it's really small. The commercial shipbuilding is a major part of the market. So in order to keep our shipbuilding capability, we have to look at both the whole shipbuilding capability, how to remodel to compete with China and Korea. So as Brent mentioned, that's the quick action for Japan, because I'm supporting on the SME to get in the supply chain in the U.S. Ship repairs in Japan. So we have a lot of shipyards in Japan not really using it because demand went down. So for example, the shipyard in Maizuru, shipyard in Hokkaido, in Hakodate, and there's a lot of shipyard not really using it. So if we work together with the DoD and MOD and major shipbuilding companies to keep our order from a U.S. Navy to ship repair in example like Maizuru and Hakodate, and those shipyards get a job, and they can keep like skilled workers there, and they're starting to rebuilding their capability now going down. So I think it's the quick remedy for the Japanese shipbuilding is a part of like working with the U.S. Navy for the repair, the maintenance, overhaul.
I'm just curious, though, and Monica, I'll move to you, but this makes complete logical sense from a military perspective to do sort of forward maintenance, repair, and overhaul.
Yeah.
What I hear sometimes, though, stateside, though, is a fear from some companies that ultimately, if the repair is being done forward in theater by Japan, these are American jobs that are being lost. I'm sure you've heard this as well, and
Yeah.
I'm just curious how you respond to that.
Well, there is legislation, laws that limit what we can do, and so trying to get some relief. And again, common sense should reign, but that's not so common, unfortunately. I think there's a saying on that. Reality and necessity is driving, I think, for more military repair operations overseas, to include India, South Korea, but most importantly, we should be looking at Japan on this. And I'll be looking closer at Hakodate. I'm also very familiar with Maizuru, and I can definitely say those are places that the U.S. Navy has a need to operate more robustly in the Sea of Japan. Having a place where they can be sustained closer to where they'd operate makes logical sense. As for taking away American jobs, the reality is, as those ships are deployed, there's a huge backlog in the shipyard. So if you have a backlog, you're not really taking any jobs away. You're just taking some of that backlog off the back end and you're moving it somewhere else. And that's kind of the reality. But we also need a bigger Navy, so we need to do more building, and there's that capital infusion to go in there. You also asked about comparative advantages, and I kind of wanted to touch back on that before going to Monica, and that is, for the United States, the simplest is nuclear power. We run the most successful naval nuclear propulsion program in the world. That's our comparative advantage. SMRs, I think, taking advantage of that could be put on ships as propulsion. But we don't have the capacity to build at a global competitive scale like ultra-large container ships or the LNG carriers. That's where the technical competencies of Japanese shipbuilders, and South Korean shipbuilders too, but Japanese shipbuilders can be brought together, as well as capital. So the technical, for those two types of ships, the intellectual capacity to engineer and design it, and the labor, but also like naval architects, but also the shipyards to build them, and then doing the modifications in the United States, making forward compatible ships for nuclear propulsion. That's where you start to merge the best of all into one new class. And I wanted to touch on that.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. Monica.
I think we haven't really been thinking about the maritime domain as a whole, and especially the people that build the ship, design the ship, engineer different systems as a strategic domain. I think if you look across many domains that are critical for security today, such as semiconductor, shipbuilding, nuclear energy, we just do not have the people that are going to go into those jobs across levels of technical skill and education. In fact, there are hundreds of thousands of jobs just in the shipbuilding in the United States. It's several 100,000. The same thing is true for semiconductors. We don't have those people. Those people don't exist. It takes a really long time to develop technical expertise. We don't have the tools to support those education pathways. And this is something we haven't really thought about as a nation. And so I think one of the really critical elements is, one, to think about the people, the workforce as a strategic domain, knowing that we have to both build a merchant and a defense maritime science, technology, and workforce industry. And second, that we have amazing examples in the United States of having created such domains. So after Sputnik in 1958, Congress approved the National Defense Education Act 1.0. So many of our science leadership across domain can really be traced back to that. So this is, when we used to do really great things in terms of science and technology, and this was understanding that people are a critical strategic domain. They cannot be an afterthought. Even if we had, all the capital and the industry ready, it would still take many years to develop the people to actually get the job done. So I think there is a shift in how we approach workforce that really needs to change. And so one of the things I'm particularly excited is the Genesis mission as part of the American Science and Security Platform that this administration has launched in the fall. I think it's a really incredible way to focus on workforce, on science, education, innovation ecosystem, and like rebuilding the ecosystem for what's today. Another really, I think, incredible thing we did in the country is in 1862 with the land grant universities. That was really to create a workforce, both technical and more academic, to really understand and work on food security. So if within just 50 or 60 years, we went from being a food insecure country to being extremely food secure and exporting foods largely because of this investment. Again, thinking about workforce and people as a strategic domain. In fact, so much of what we have done in terms like MREs came out of the land grants universities study on nutrition. And so I think we really should go back and think about how can each sector, from industry to academia, philanthropy, with the support of the US and Japanese government, put our brains together and create some of these networks to really develop people. The last thing, in terms of advantages, we are losing, both in Japan and the United States, we are losing capabilities that we led on. And one of that is naval architecture and marine engineering. There's only a handful of universities, both in Japan and the United States, that train the next generation of naval engineers or architects. These places are essentially getting absorbed through mechanical engineering, which is, a similar but very different field. And so we really need to train more folks who are going to design ships, and we need to also design the skill and marked workforce programs to essentially get a whole new generation of Japanese and American young men and women to go into those fields and understand that it can be an extremely fulfilling job, and that it's really changed because it's very technologically savvy.
Great.
Over.
Thank you. I think we have time for probably one more round of questions, and we'll open it up to the audience. So in person, and also if you're online, please send your questions in. I think, Monica, I want to start with you, because I think just to take a step back for people that are not, maybe as focused on the shipbuilding and these issues, I think one question that probably, the average person has would be, to what extent are young people interested in these kinds of jobs today? Welding and designing ships. Like, is there, are they going to come to these jobs? What is the challenge around that? And relatedly, sort of the demographic changes as well that we're seeing in these, and particularly Japan, places like that, how it may affect the industry.
Well, I think young people at the end want to think about a future that's fulfilling and secure. So if we can communicate, if they know that those jobs are going to provide a way to a skilled, long life career, they will go there. So for a long time, I think there have been questions about pay. So of course, if people are don't feel that these jobs can provide enough to have a fulfilling life and secure career, they're just not going to go there. So that's one element that requires strategy and design. The second one is communicating how the jobs have changed from many decades ago. In fact, if we deferred them before to blue collar works, right now we refer to the new the smart collar workforce, so the new tech workforce. And I think we are not really doing a good job communicating and showing our young people those jobs. As an unrelated example, I am a professor of biology. I teach a class of 600 students. Nearly all of my students want to go into dental or medical school. And the reason they go into pre-med or pre-dental, it's because if you ask them, is they like science. But there are so many other jobs that even the biomedical sciences support. They just don't know about them. So I think one is design, second is communication, third is that we really need to rethink the cost of any education, not just higher education. And so I think that's why scholarships, programs, like the SMART Scholarship, which was part of the National Defense Education Act 1.0 in 1958, were extremely powerful. When I was at the Department of the Navy, I also learned about many of the workforce programs that the Blue Forge Alliance, together with the Department of the Navy, is supporting, especially with the submarine industrial base. And they have done truly superb work. And we can learn so much from that. And again, that was like very much on the technical workforce. At the University of Michigan, one thing is like, how do we communicate students to shift fields, for example, to naval engineering? And so this is something the professor at the University of Michigan, Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering, have been doing, essentially through a program that covers tuition, but also rethink how we train naval engineers. It's not through just giving classes, but giving the practicum. So you bring together research, education, and apprenticeship. So they spend their summers, for example, going to some of the shipyards in Korea, right? So we could do that. And that program has the support of the Department of the Navy. And we could do that with the Japan, with the Japan shipyards, and have this exchange. So I think design, support, economical support, communication are really critical elements. And they're not that hard, right? It's easier to building a ship and finding the capital, but it's absolutely critical that we think of those strategically.
Great, thank you. Admiral, for you, one thing I noticed you mentioned in your remarks, which I found interesting, is you mentioned sort of opportunities for new technologies as we're thinking about shipbuilding, and particularly as we're trying to revitalize the industry here in the United States and also in Japan. It seems like that's a perfect time, if you will, to introduce some of these new technologies. And I wondered if you could just speak a little bit about how that's proceeding in Japan.
Right. So people saying that they're introducing the AI system. So yeah, it's true. My company is the AI company. So and I'm working on a mission-based AI support system. So it's really, to save the human, labor to design, and also like, high tech, like a AI-driven, for example, the welding or like a painting, whatever, the people can do it, AI can do it. And the AI is a brain, and hook up with some robotics. You can make it like, skilled worker without people. So that's the part in the US and Japan is really good at that. But as the Monica mentioned about how we're going to recruit next generation for the people to engage this business, is back to my comment is like, this is the fundamental question is whether we can make it more attractive industries. So that is a big, the fundamental question. Because, as I said, like my companies are AI companies. We're a lot of, the people applying for a job because good money, and they can see the good future. So, but in Japanese ship industry, said like we called it 3K. They got 3K. That means that the 3K job is a dirty, dangerous, and demanding. And the pay going down because of profit. They cannot make it. Yeah. So back in like 25, 30 years ago, Nissan, like a Toyota, the auto industries, there's a huge demand, and also young people really wanted to join the auto industries. But now, not that much. More like a high tech, like a internet, AI, because that's young people see the future. It's the salary and a good education, a good life. So for the shipbuilding, how we can remodel, revitalize the industry itself to be giving the young people the future.
If I can on this one. So this is something I've been working with for better part of the last 5 years. It's in the Ships for America Act. Some of it's in the executive order. And by the way, the President's executive order from last year on shipbuilding dominance, as well as the Ships for America Act, are very much in alignment by design. So there is a continuity in this. So when it comes to automation, really the better term is modernization, because if you remember, a little over a year ago, we had a dock workers, longshoremen, labor dispute with eastern ports, basically from the Gulf of America to New England. And the issue was over automation. It's really about modernization, which actually makes the workers' quality of life better. It's also one of the most dangerous jobs, working in the docks, and it makes it safer. And your productivity goes up. And when you're paid by royalties, each container you move, you get a little extra bonus. The more that you can move, the more that you're paid. And also, the bigger the demand, the more productive the demand for workers. So the labor union should be embracing modernization. The workers definitely would benefit. They'd also get better pay because they could move more cargo. They could also make more welds. They could also make more ships. The same thing applies. And just to give some history on this, the American auto industry is one of the leading adopters of robotics. Now, that doesn't mean a robot relieves all the human labor. Someone still has to fix the things. Someone still has to kind of monitor them because they do kind of go haywire. I mean, there was a video of a robot in a restaurant that was dancing out of control, and it took a human being to get it under control. So you're always going to have that human piece. So where you had a blue-collar worker that was very dirty, very hands-on turning and welding, now you're going to have that, could be a blue-collar worker in a suit and a tie, operating 10 robots and then having to go fix it or to engage. So a very high level of competency and skills that we're talking about, and a lot of them. The auto industry embraced this. They brought, and what happened is the workforce grew in the 90s, and it didn't shrink as they increasingly adopted robotics. Productivity went up, profits went up, salaries went up along with it by 35%. Okay, so that's above inflationary. So auto workers benefited, and the auto industry did better business. Same thing applies to shipbuilding. It's the same fundamentals. The other part of that is, how do you attract young people? Well, one of it is, it's a national endeavor, so there's a sense of patriotism. You're producing something that when you watch on the news, a destroyer that's in the Arabian Sea, it's like, I built that. There's that. That's hard to quantify. That's a little harder to go after. The other thing that really attracts young people is you want to be part of something new.
Yes.
You don't want to be going in, like in your great-grandfather's shipyard and doing not very qualitative or conducive work, and it's not really contributing much. But if you've got AI, which this augmented reality is like Pokemon Go, if you kind of look at that, but apply it into the shipyard where you have a welder that goes into a space and looks around with these goggles and can see, okay, I'm in this compartment, I need to do a spot weld there, I got to put a pad eye there, I need to cut out interference here, and you're just looking around the room. That's the world that's going to attract the young workers into the shipyard. So robotic systems for greater productivity, modern, leading edge, like leading edge, and to get to the Admiral's point, we really need to leapfrog the competitive advantage with the Chinese, and we have to rethink logistics, maritime logistics, because that cargo is why you have ships, and the ships that you build need to be done in technologies and competencies that are ahead of where the Chinese are. So this was the genesis of the revolution in shipping 5 years ago, and it is the right approach. How do you actually create that comparative advantage? Part of it's going to be nuclear, but it's not only. A lot of it's going to be drones. And it's going to be an interesting kind of modularization of shipbuilding, too. The Lego pieces of the ships are going to get smaller, more disaggregated additive manufacturing. These are the technologies and the types of competencies that our young kids today, like my daughter in college right now, this is the world that they understand and expect. The shipyards need to get out of our great-grandfather's world and get into our children's world.
No, I think it's so well said, because I will just say, I'm struck by, I think if you ask the average American, like what comes to mind, and I imagine the same for the Japanese, what comes to mind when you hear the word shipbuilding or shipbuilding job? They kind of almost imagine it more as like Rosie the Riveter, kind of like, right? As opposed to, robots are cool. I have an 8-year-old nephew, who loves robots, and you're right, they want to be part of that technology, that future. And so I think changing the image, if you will, of what shipbuilding means and how it's done would go a long way, which I don't think is a part of the problem that's talked about as much, because we tend to focus more on, the kinds of ships that are missing or competition with China. Let's actually open it up to the audience. So I think if we have any questions, maybe take one from the room first, and then I have a bunch online. Anyone here? Please just introduce yourself, and I just ask that you please ask a question rather than, a mini lecture to everyone.
Okay, well, you just
And you have to.
you just messed up my entry point, but I think it's important for me to at least give a little bit of a prequel here.
Sorry, please introduce yourself.
Philip Sobeck, retired Rear Admiral, prior MSC Commander, Admiral. Mm-hmm. It was great to share some water with you. And Brent, always great to see you. But the question, but I want to highlight it with sort of what I'm doing now. The question is, we have, again, your 5-year plan. Brent, I'll just use that as your sort of marker here. We have the Ships for America Act in sort of movement. We have the AMAP, the Maritime Action Plan, already out. It's really the question, ma'am, that you used was, what's the real barrier here? What gets us from Stimson, great discussion, panel discussions, into action? So forward-looking, third-generation shipping company out of Osaka, Fuyo Kaiyun, is my parent company. They had a visionary move to open up a U.S. entity, and I get to lead that entity as a startup. So how does a small business owner get into this market? Because the gaps are here. The what and the why is all there. It's really the how. And so the framework of the AMAP gives us a lot of the how, but it's a lot of legislation. So how does a pilot, if you will, or a sort of a grassroots movement happen?
Great. Brent, would you like to take that?
So I'm lucky that I've got a couple of merchant mariners that are interns at Heritage Foundation, and we're diving into how to change the business model in your old command at Military Sea Lift Command with USMS, because I think we have to change. Right now, the way to prime the pump is to get the cargo and to get kind of like a business model that makes sense commercially. And it's going to have to be a hybrid. It's going to have to be a mix of federal cargo, federal operations, military, but then room for commercial activity at the same time. So, product tankers are big. Some portion of that hold needs to be like a preposition, treat it like the old prepo fleets. But rather than sitting at anchor in Garapan and in Saipan like they used to do in the 90s and the early 2000s, it's a ship that's actually moving a circuit but always ready on call to go gas up the carrier strike group. And I'm thinking about the Bighorn grounding as case in point. When you're relying on a ship that then all of a sudden is no longer available, it'd be nice to have that military sea lift ship that you can grab and say, okay, 5 days away, gas up so we can continue combat operations. That's not the way we want to do business. But then if you're going to scale it up into the commercial, step away from every federal, where's the cargo? And the approach that I've been looking at this, talking with folks in Europe, is look at the shipping routes. LNG is one that is an easy one. I'm just going to focus on the easy ones right now. LNG carriers. The route in our allies right now, the issue in Iran, which is, we were talking in the green room before this, energy surpluses and reserves are dwindling. LNG in Taiwan, I think, the news saying 11 days. It's a mistake on their part, getting rid of their nuclear power. That's a different story for a different day. So having trusted sources, allied shippers, available with product is what matters. And that great route from the Pacific Northwest, perhaps Canadian, because that's where the LNG lines end and can be load up the ships, but going on trusted ships and flag to go to Japan and go to Korea, to go to Taiwan and LNG. Get the LNG out of North America rather than relying on coming out of the Persian Gulf. I think that would be welcomed because it's a lot easier. Of course, it comes down to cost, but I think more and more in this very risky world that we live in, risk, threat is action. And I'm not talking corporate risk, financial risk, but real risk is starting to dominate the calculations more and more, where costs can be borne more so than in the past. Where that ends up, I don't know.
Thank you. Admiral, we have a question from Serena at NEC Corporation. Is curious if you could just speak about whether there's any indications from industry in Japan that they're interested in investing in the U.S. shipbuilding industry here, or if there's a need for them to build up their work in Japan and there is money from the Japanese government. Is there any incentive for them to come here?
Come here, it mean the Japanese ship industry coming in here in the U.S.?
Yes, coming to the United States and investing here.
I think it's we always talk with the brand that this is a great opportunity for the Japanese shipping industry to invest here in the U.S. and work together, and that is revitalize Japanese ship industry as well. So, number one, because not really competitiveness that we have in Japan. So probably lots of order from all over the world to the U.S. shipbuilding. For example, like military shipbuilding, submarine, the Huntington Ingalls, and other larger shipbuilding here. So one of the course of action we take is to work with the U.S. shipping to invest there. Coming. The Japanese shipbuilders here working together and bringing back all those the know-how and how to the work together. And also I wanted to have bring back to the trust on the Japanese shipbuilders, and hopefully like this is a high hard for the Japanese the company to work for the ship repairs business in the 7th Fleet, because there is the requirement, there is the high, the scrutinized all those, process. So if, working together here in the U.S. and Japanese ship industries in the U.S. and give the enough trust to, okay, it's okay to, work a U.S. Navy ship in the business in Japan as well. It's a great benefit for Japanese industry as well. And also like, shipbuilding broad-based industries. Japanese, industrial structure is 95% is a SME. And SME has a, really sophisticated, manufacturing power and parts, prime parts, and really, reliable. So working with the U.S. ship industry in here and bring back the trust there, and that will give the opportunity for the Japanese 95%, SME join the shipbuilding business with the U.S. in Japan, that will give a great chance for revitalizing Japanese economy as well.
Just two add-ons. So the tariffs that were being used, they're still being used, just different one. That was an incentive for investment in the United States. There's an economic statecraft with our allies. Get beneath the free market aspects of it, but look at it as a diplomatic tool to try to get to a deal. The other, more substantive and enduring, is the maritime prosperity zones. So for a Japanese government, Japanese shipbuilder to come to the United States, two things. One is, how do we get relief on these negotiations with DC over trade? And that's what's happening right now. Then the other is, well, okay, 10 years from now, how are we going to get a return on investment? There is tax incentives and relief that's provided inside these maritime prosperity zones, which are an executive order, but they're also in the legislation. It's an update to the opportunity zones, and there are already several municipalities that are already self-promoting. We'll see what Commerce, I think, is the one that has the rose on that to make decisions soon.
Great. Other question from the audience in person? Okay, but we have more online, so I'll keep going with them. This is an interesting one. A question from someone about strategic partners, and specifically whether the United States and Japan might want to advance shipbuilding through endeavors like the Quad, or engaging partners such as India. I don't know who would like to take this, Admiral or Monica. Do you want? First? Yeah, Monica. Do you have any? Would you on this one at all?
I think it's really important to involve other partners. I think there are many different elements of the idea is great, but how do we go about it? Because there are political sensibilities too. And besides that, I think there are different countries can provide different elements, like Brent talked about the Philippines. So I think it makes sense, and I think there's a real demand signals of align, the word democracies to support naval power.
Great, thank you. Admiral, did you want to, or Brent?
If you don't. I was just in India at Raisina Dialogue, and I go there. I get invitations to go to a new series of dialogues called, I'm going to probably get this wrong, Sagarmathan. It's about the maritime industry. So Prime Minister Modi's been very focused in on reviving India's shipping and shipbuilding industry. They have a similar dynamic, a problem that we do. They rely on unfriendly nations' flagged ships, and they've got a big threat next door to the north in China. So it has much the same strategic calculations as the United States. India is a part of the Quad. You would think it might make sense. Australia and Japan in there, it kind of makes sense. It doesn't necessarily have the robustness because the partners that you really want to get into this are beyond the Quad. You'd want South Korea to be in there. You perhaps want Taiwan in there. Maybe that'll come. And one of the things I think is think G7, but for maritime, a maritime group of nations, calling it an M9, might be a better way to correlate policies, incentives, because India in particular, trying to attract capital to invest in their maritime industry, much like the United States, we run the risk of becoming competitors, perhaps adversaries in an economic sense, in this sector, when we really should try to find a way to make it complementary. And so this is early days. So far, it isn't turned into an unhealthy competitive kind of situation. It's what I also cautioned when I was in New Delhi recently, and to find ways to try to align. And I think the Quad might be a good place to start that discussion for sure.
Admiral, anything you'd like to add?
Yes, it's the idea itself, the Quad is great, but practically, Japan is not really, used to it. And I think the Japanese industries more like a step-by-step approach, and start with the U.S. allied countries, and understand the different countries, the industrial cultures, and the business style, and then they have the confidence, or Japan, the shipbuilding industries get used to doing the business with other countries. And then next step is the quad or triple. But especially in India, I've been visited India many times, and we have like a support for the business in India. But it's really, really difficult. It's the approaching difficult, and there are kind of the business style is different. So this is my personal opinion. That at this point in the Japanese ship industry, we're too early to jump into that level.
I am curious though, in other parts of the defense industry, we have seen though increasingly more deepening bilateral relationships without the United States, like Japan and South Korea on some issues, or Japan and Australia on issues, Japan and the Philippines, in part because of some uncertainty around the administration and the future in general. And I'm wondering though, could you see that even at a bilateral level perhaps happening, say with Japan, Australia, or Japan, Philippines, or do you think it's really, the effort is really still focused mostly on the United States?
Because in terms, you're speaking of like shipbuilding.
Yeah.
I definitely, put the high priority working with the U.S.
United States. Okay, excellent. Okay, yes, please. We have a question from Andrew.
Thank you. For those who joined late online or in person, I'm Andrew Oros. I direct the Japan program at the Stimson Center, and I'm part of the task force here. I also would just like to acknowledge other members of our task force in the audience, Dr. Jeffrey Gresh and Mr. Chris Johnstone. So thank you for coming today. I wonder if we could talk about, in the context of Iran, because as you say, it's on our minds with the strikes, in the actual fighting scenario of using military ships, and the question about, as the area of operation is moving beyond a first island chain, and we talk more about resilience, what sort of potential do you see? I'll ask Yuki this from a Japanese perspective, but also Brent and Monica, for Japanese cooperation in military repair and maintenance away from Japan. So to put it like more clearly, in an actual fighting scenario in the area around Japan, presumably we want more maintenance and repair abilities a little bit away from that area. So should that be just the U.S. responsibility, or should we be looking at other places a little away from the conflict zone that would service not just U.S. naval vessels, but also Japanese maritime self-defense force vessels?
Excellent question. Second island chain, possibly even further, third island.
I've got opinions on this and ideas, but let me go last.
In a former, military officers, I'm with you because the range of the missile, the DF series, is over Japan archipelago. It's in the major conflict, it's dangerous. So it's logical to think about we're gonna back up for the maintenance facility, outside the range of the missile attack or like a danger zone. So it could be like the Hawaii, it could be like Australia or some other part, but that is not really easy. I think that is not really easy. Only Japan can do it. The work with the U.S. is much more easy. Accessible. In terms of like a trust from other countries, and also, again, like our, the industry is not really get used to working with other countries. So, working with the U.S. and the U.S. Navy and making a outside the missile range of a repair facility is the essential. Needed.
Monica, do you want to just speak perhaps a little bit about maybe some of the workforce challenges around that? Because particularly some of the places you might want to disperse shipbuilding, second island chain, right? These are smaller islands. Australia, it seems, has its own challenges around shipbuilding. Same with, maybe New Zealand. I don't know if they would allow that, in wartime, but that could potentially be an option. But same thing, challenges with workforce.
Well, I think everybody with the idea is great. what are the levers and how do you make it happen? So really curious to hear your point of view, Brent.
Yeah.
I think, in many ways, developing, as like if history is any lesson, developing the workforce in other countries has been in many ways easier than in the U.S. because we have exported, rather than continuing to invest in design in our people here. So I think there are a lot of programs and lessons like we can use of like how it's been developed in other countries, like think about like semiconductor, but ultimately, right, the industry and the jobs have to be there so that you can support the people to funnel them into those. And I think those levers are probably harder.
Okay. The reason I want to go last is I'm going to give you I'll go through the region. So Admiral Sakaguchi, thank you for talking about the threat rings, the missiles. So in peacetime, we're in a new Cold War to win it. And it's not of our choosing, and it's a collective we. Our allies, I think Tokyo realized this under Prime Minister Abe's second stint as Prime Minister, this reality. So you have to compete today. So places in the shipbuilding, ship repair, transshipment hubs, all of this is the maritime industrial base. You got to look for where the risk, the opportunity, and the capacity all kind of line up right. Right now, Subic Bay, that's the place. Luckily, Cerebus was able to intervene years ago. I was somewhat kind of on the periphery of this one to prevent it from going into a hostile takeover. That base, or that port, is a key place. So having ship repair, this is a good place where the U.S. is a key player. The Philippines are a treaty ally. The Japanese are a treaty ally. We all have a common interest to develop out that repair facility. Subic Bay, it's the obvious choice. Move in a little further afield, and where possible, with those three metrics I mentioned. Malaysia, another one I have from some first-hand knowledge on. There's some possibilities of picking up some repair, more commercial, but also some of the ships that we have, aluminum welding comes to mind, like Port Klang. There's also transshipment possibilities as well in eastern Malaysia, the Borneo side, as well as their naval facilities at Sepanggar for naval. A little harder because they're not a treaty ally. So the risk is higher, and pretty high because you're inside the missile range. Moving into a range where the missiles don't quite reach, certainly they reach Darwin, but they don't reach Perth, Australia. So this is part of the calculation between the AUKUS deal. So, developing out in the Japanese Navy, Japanese shipbuilding, or working with the Australians there in Perth and Henderson to actually build perhaps Mogami frigates in the future. So there's another organically kind of like alignment which may intersect in Western Australia. But where you're looking at like greenfield places that we need to really do new investment, now we're talking South and Central Pacific. The one that I'm most intrigued about, that you've got all of the metrics align in spades, it's American Samoa. It's American territory. It's needed for logistics needs, so there's a need for it. It already has a deep water port. It has fuel storage that's latent, that's not fully used. It has a shipyard that's for fishing fleet, and it's antiquated, but it's got key real estate, and you have a governor that wants it. You've got a strategy, a strategic approach that sees the value of it. This would be a place to try to maybe develop also a logistics support and perhaps repair. Far, far away, but where the rear area support. And then you move further into the Central Pacific, the compacts of free association. So Federated States of Micronesia come to mind. This is a place also to invest in to try to develop out the port infrastructure, which is associated with airports and the roads and the energy. So it's not just building ports, it's everything that makes them viable. There's a strategic value in it. There would be a good use case for Japanese-American kind of partnering. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention something that I've always tried to hit on, and that is the Development Finance Corporation. It's in the news. We can get to it on the Iran piece. I plug in for that, of how it's being used in a pretty broad kind of use cases in insurance. But in this case, infrastructure. And while right now it's precluded from going into like territories, trying to see if we can get relief legislatively to allow this federal kind of supported financing to infrastructure projects. That might also be, and again, you can actually craft interesting collaborations with our allies, like the Japanese, in these finance structures to get into places where otherwise the market share is not big enough, but the strategic value is so high it makes sense to invest. So,
Monica, did you want to add something? I saw you shaking your head in agreement with much of what he was saying. No.
I don't want to take more time. I agree with everything.
Okay.
well, thanks, Monica.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Yes, Chris.
Yep.
Thanks. I'm Chris Johnstone. I'm at the Asia Group. I was a part of this task force and had the benefit of learning a lot from people who know far more about this issue than I do. So really great panel discussion today. I want to ask a specific question to Admiral Seguchi and then a broader question to all three of you. So the specific question for you, Admiral, is Prime Minister Takaichi has made shipbuilding one of Japan's 17 priority sectors for policy support, subsidies, et cetera. I wonder what you make of what she has announced so far, and given your own sort of concerns about revitalizing Japanese shipbuilding, how effective do you think the measures announced so far are likely to be? Second question for all three of you. I wonder if I could just push you a bit on what's a 5-year agenda, concrete agenda for U.S.-Japan cooperation in this space. Monica had some great, I think, ideas around workforce development. We've talked about increasing MRO in theater, which makes a lot of sense. I myself am deeply skeptical about the likelihood of Japanese shipbuilding investment in the United States. I detect very little interest on the part of industry that I've spoken to. I detect very little interest on the part of the Japanese government. There was a brief run, as I understand it, to make a shipbuilding deliverable part of the Takaichi visit. That got nowhere. So is this really a realistic place for us to focus in a 5-year time frame? If yes, would love to hear more about that. But if not, what else can we put on the agenda in a 5-year time frame? Thanks.
Great.
Yeah, the question is always a great questions. The Prime Minister Takaichi's top priority, the 17 industries, and I really happy that publicly comment that the Takaichi administration focus more on revitalizing shipbuilding and with the government support. As I said, the shipbuilding and the broader based industry, and that include all SMEs, and the 90% is SME in the Japanese industries. So if the Japanese shipbuilding industry is growing again, the many SMEs, the local companies is growing again. So in the total, it ended up like Japanese economy is growing up again. So Prime Minister Takaichi's the comment and also put the priority on the shipbuilding is the great step forward for the revitalizing not only the shipbuilding but also like a Japanese economy as a whole. And the second question is, yes, I 80% I agree with you, and 20% is that I hope, because I have the same information with Chris. That's I talk with the shipping industry in Japan, but they don't really want to invest the U.S. I think partly because they're afraid to get rid of all things, right? I mean, they lost their portion of the profit. So 5 years in the future is the maybe step-by-step approach is the best for in Japan, because they have never have the experience working with the ship industry here in the U.S. But if they started the step-by-step and maybe the small project, and then they know each other, they trust each other, and then next step is the large investment. So as the Brent said, like auto industries in Japan producing Toyota, Nissan, and next step is selling the car to the U.S. And next step is bring the auto industry, Toyota in the U.S. Nissan US, Honda US. That's the things I'm look for.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen, won't happen like 5 years, but in the 10 years, maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's good to see you again, Chris. And I'm extremely optimistic, though I am frustrated because it's somewhat personal from my long time growing up in connections in Japan that there still is this hesitancy, fully understandable, and I also see the same thing. I'm hoping to kind of late to task to kind of engage and to try to help some of the confidence on this. 5 years, there's a couple of strategic things. The markets, the supply and demand of shipping is going to drive it to where if you're interested in growing your market share. So the first question is, and this is the question I'll be asking many of the shipbuilders face to face is, are you seriously hungry for market share? The only way they're going to grow their market share and be positioned when the demand outpaces supply is to have more capacity to build ships and where the workforce is, because they also have issues at home, workforce, and that's the United States is a good place to place those bets. So this is where the business and the foundational principles seem to be pushing to greater investment in the United States. They'll eventually get to it, hopefully not when it's, most of the profit and the earnings are past that opportunity. So that's kind of where I see the fundamentals of this. Well, a couple of things they could do, because I agree with that one second, and this is a conversations I have a lot, is you got to do iterative. It's good engineering. And at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, I'm an engineer trying to solve problems, and you want to minimize the risk, and you want to learn as you go and iterate and build on each one. So the first thing is, if you're not going to do like Hanwha and buy a shipyard, find one that's kind of got work, but could use a little extra attention, a little extra assistance. And and it matters the yard, because each are like snowflakes, they're different. And each industry, each shipbuilder is different, in Japan as well as the United States. But to find a good natural fit. So if there's a Japanese shipbuilder, I'll take a program that just got canceled, but hopefully could get reversed. The frigate, the Constellation frigate up in Marinette Shipyard. There's a workforce issue, there's a design issues. Perhaps that would be a place to partner to mitigate your risk if you're a Japanese shipbuilder, to say, hey, can we partner with you, Fincantieri, to kind of like fill in some gaps and maybe accelerate the 2 ships that you have to finish building. And the success or the lessons learned build the confidence in Tokyo for that, whoever that might be, if it is, to go somewhere else and to say, well, we'd like to get more in the innovation. Maybe we invest in this other area of maritime innovation. Could be Detroit, University of Michigan. It could also be in the Bay Area. Or they just say, we really like this. We got friends in all the high places. Let's go ahead and buy a yard or take one over, a brownfield kind of opportunity. So in 5 years, I think would be, if we see that, then that's indication we're on the right track.
We have a related question from Yuki Tatsumi at IIPS. Hello, Yuki. That recently President Trump made an exception to the Jones Act based on national security needs in relation to foreign flagged oil tankers accessing U.S. ports. And she wants to know if the United States and Japan could use this as a precedent to incentivize industries of both countries. And if so, should there be an effort among the legislatures of the 2 countries to try to push this forward?
Oh, I guess that's to me. Hi, Yuki. Thanks for the easy question. So Jones Act, like cabotage laws all over the world, it's protectionist in its nature. I'm agnostic. So for those that may think heritage one way or the other, we're actually more nuanced in the middle on this issue. 60 days isn't long enough in the cycle of business for shipping to really get the type of learning or to try to kind of like change things in any way, good or bad. So it's to be determined if it's going to have any real impact, because the intent was to try to reduce oil prices. And really the places you're looking at by those waivers would be Puerto Rico and Hawaii and like perhaps Guam and the Marianas Islands. But from a political perspective, it's not going to make a big difference, and it's also not going to make a big difference in the time to get the fuels to those places that would benefit most directly. And again, we're talking 60 days. What it does is it does show, hey, we can take this away. We need to, for American shippers, you got to start getting competitive, and you have to start changing the way you do business. I think that's probably the biggest outcome. I have very low confidence that there's going to be any kind of real successful modification or revocation of the Jones Act. The special interest the risks are so high that I'm not advocating for something like that. I'm more of advocating, let's focus in on global competitiveness and get more ships and more allies into and let the Jones Act world kind of exist. And eventually it will be not as necessary, but it'll always be on the books as a fiducial level of protection of domestic shipping, which is fine, is needed.
I think we have time for one final question. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for the great panel. My name is Miho, and I come more from the business investing side. You all talked about kind of low margin as a big challenge that shipbuilding industry faces as a whole, but I wonder if there's any specific areas or niche technology that can attract human or financial capital to create momentum, or if there's any technologies that can be repurposed differently. So for instance, I come more for a healthcare. A lot of vaccine companies would use their technology in infectious disease to create proof of concept, but then use that for cancer immunotherapy that has a more higher profit, higher margin. So I wonder if there's any kind of glimmers of hopes when it comes to business side of shipbuilding.
Great. Monica, why don't I let you take that first?
Yes, and I wanted to also briefly I'm back. I wanted to also briefly respond to the 5-year plan, because I think this is connected. So I think one of the ideas for focusing on the education and science and technology and building an ecosystem between Japan and the United States was exactly because it doesn't require us to get around really big things like the Jones Act. And so I think, and I also am a molecular biologist, so I tend to think in very small steps and very scientifically about things. Before you can scale and think big, you have to start from the ground up and figure out if something works. So we already have a history of cooperation with Japan, all the way from fusion to biotech, cancer vaccines, and so space. And so I think we already have structures in place to extend this cooperation into maritime technology, maritime education, and workforce. And thinking about even within the United States, I mentioned we have this new science and security, American Science and Security platform as part of the Genesis mission. Well, that is like OSTP policy. It's being executed through the Department of Energy now, but it is kind of spreading through all the sister agencies. So there are 26 lighthouse science and technology challenges, all the way from biomanufacturing to fusion and new nuclear. And I don't see why we couldn't add the maritime technologies and thinking about even techno-economic analysis of the workforce and different elements we spoke about here today as a lighthouse challenge. And so bring together our Executive Act and Ships for America and this other really big S&T policies that we're starting in the United States with together inside, and also extended with our ongoing partnership and memorandum of collaboration we just signed, extended and signed and re-extended with Japan. So, we already have, for example, like a few months ago, we hosted at the University of Michigan 13 different universities. We had a U.S. Korea Shipbuilding Forum. Steve Brock was part of the panels. It had 13 different universities, has industry, had government from both countries. So I think within the next 5 years, I really don't see why we couldn't start some of those pilots, both on the applied research side and on the workforce side. And I think, rethinking about how to repurpose some of the technology, especially on the side of robotics and automation with, the new advances we have in AI and computation. I don't see why we wouldn't be able to achieve that in the next 5 years.
Excellent, thank you. Brent, 30 seconds, final thoughts, and then Admiral, as our ally, I will give you the last word.
I think we need to look for market disruptors coming from outside the maritime industrial sector to shake things up. At one point I got 1 degree of separation from trying to have a meeting with Elon Musk, not because to bring him in on this, but to find out who like him he is seeing out there that could be a disruptor. We need a ship X for shipping and for shipbuilding. So we need a ships X kind of approach, and that is build it what makes sense to you and leapfrog. Don't be constrained by conventional logic and thinking. Of course, you have to confront the innovator's dilemma, which is a great book, but it's very much at play here.
Admiral?
Thank you very much. It's a great comment. Question. Not because I'm working for the AI company, but it's the AI and the robotics, the mix with the AI and the robotics, a great common shared technology for the ship industry and the other industries as well. And plus, I saw the Nissan close down the big auto factory in Japan, and I just kind of hit the idea that all those skilled workers could be work for the ship industries that like share the area of welding or other special techniques. So we should think about how to mobilize the workforce to different area. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. So I want to just thank each of our panelists this morning for such a thoughtful conversation, to the Japan program for hosting this wonderful event, Stimson's comm teams who always do a great job, and thank you to our audience here in person and also online for joining us this morning. The video for this will be available on the Stimson website and also the YouTube page, and also please go to the Japan program site on the Stimson website for more information. They're going to be releasing more parts of the task force report and different commentaries, including, I think, one Friday. So please be sure to check that out as well. Thank you and have a good rest of your day.